Welcome, everyone. This is Lisa Colton from C3 Communications and Darim Online. We're thrilled to have you here in our fifth and final webinar in this five-part series generously funded by UJA Federation of New York. This series is all about maturing your social media practice for synagogues. We're glad you're with us today. As always, the recording of this webinar, slides, and other resources that are mentioned will be emailed out shortly after we conclude. And will also be posted on the Darim Online website, and the link to that will be in that follow-up email. It was also in your login email that you got for today's session. Today we are talking about crowdfunding, which is a tool for fundraising around particular projects that has grown in prominence recently. I'm sure you have seen or participated in it. So today we're going to be talking about what is crowdfunding, not only how does it work, but why does it work, and to explore how you might use this approach in your own work in a congregational setting. Just to review a little bit of where we've come from, this crowdfunding topic kind of sits in this larger shift where we have been in a mode of kind of hub and spokes organizing and communications for decades past. And this is kind of the classic mode of, somebody's doing the fundraising from a central location and reaching out to individuals in a campaign format. And we're moving to a more network model, both in community building and also in communications, where ideas and information and links and opportunities and the energy and the purpose around those things can flow through networks in a different kind of way that creates new opportunities for individuals, for communities, and for synagogues and congregations as well. One of the reasons that crowdfunding has been working so well in the past few years is the ability to share those projects throughout a network and the ability to activate your own network, personal and communal, to learn about those campaigns and hopefully chip in to bring them to fruition as well. So crowdfunding is one more way that we can practice thinking in this network mindset and activating those networks, not only to raise the dollars for a particular project, but also to create a sense of kind of everybody holding hands and working in a collaborative way to make something possible that otherwise might not be possible. And that's really exciting. If you're following the news, actually today, the Oculus Rift is being released, which is the first kind of retail consumer virtual reality goggles. And the Oculus Rift actually was done via Kickstarter at the very beginning. Lots of people anteed in at a pretty high dollar level. And Facebook actually bought that company for quite a bit of money. And it's really big news that this first virtual reality headset is coming to market. So you can see how crowdfunding projects can scale really quickly in some cases. So our presenter today is Miriam Brosseau. She is one of my colleagues at C3 Communications, the Director of Engagement, and also the Program Director for Eli Talks. A good friend, a longtime collaborator, and somebody who is so smart on things like this. So thank you, Miriam, for being with us today and giving us some insight into crowdfunding and how we can use it in congregational settings.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm thrilled to be here and to be able to learn with everybody and have a good conversation and give a little bit of introduction to this crazy, fun, and exciting world of crowdfunding. So first of all, I would love to just get a sense from each of you, if you can open up the chat and just think about for a moment the last time that you gave to a nonprofit or to any charitable cause. What was it that made you give? What was the impetus for opening up your wallet and giving in that way? If you could just share for a moment in the chat some of the reasons that you gave the last time that you gave, then love to see those and just get a sense of what prompts that for all of us.
So if you haven't found the chat, in your GoToWebinar control panel, one of those little tabs says chat, and if you click on the little triangle, it'll open up the chat. And if you don't have your control panel accessible, if you're in full screen mode, right at the top of your screen, you should see a little green bar that maybe says viewing Miriam's screen. And if you click on that, you'll see some options, including the chat. So go ahead and open up the chat. Let's hear some examples of the last time you gave.
All right, we got a couple coming in. It looks like the Q&A is maybe an easier place to enter some of these. I had a couple that just came in. Nuri says, I donated to an organization I grew up with and fostered a sense of community in my life. Beautiful. Ray says, request for support from a friend. Awesome. Rachel said, knew the work well of the organization. Clarice said, time to give. And Marshall says, I believed in the cause. Excellent. I think that's a nice array of options. Lisa, have you given anywhere recently? Do you want to share a little bit about why you gave?
Yeah, just in the past week, there was an annual campaign from the school that I went to, and I give an annual donation there. And I've been doing some volunteering with Jewish Family Service, helping support new refugees that are coming to our community. And my daughter actually donated her birthday to that cause. So instead of getting gifts, she asked her friends to give. And so I chipped into that campaign as well, which was really great.
That's fantastic. Excellent. We had one other come in, organization or issue that was important to me. Absolutely. I think all of these, the great storytelling, the emotional connection, the feeling that our dollars are going to make some impact, some change in the world, all of these things are super important. I think what it ultimately comes down to, though, is that we give when someone asks us, right? There has to be an ask in there. There has to be a reason, a prompt, a signal that it's time to open our wallets, it's time to open our hearts, and to make that move. And the same is absolutely true with crowdfunding, only the shape of it, the structure of it is a little bit different. Crowdfunding in its simplest definition is just the practice of funding something by a bunch of small donations, as opposed to a small amount of large donations from perhaps a smaller group of people. And it has very much been set up as an exchange. There is an expectation that if you are involved in crowdfunding a project, that you will get something in return, whether that be a handwritten note on fancy paper from the person who built the project, or whether that be your own virtual reality headset if you've helped fund Oculus Rift, for instance, at different levels. Crowdfunding is simply that, and it just so happens that this networked environment that Lisa introduced again at the beginning of this webinar, and that has been the structure that we've been living in for all of these sessions together, this new world that social media thrives in so well. Crowdfunding fits really well into this whole networked landscape that we're operating in now. And we can't pass up crowdfunding. We can't take it for granted, because it really is starting to gain momentum and gain some impact in the nonprofit world, certainly, and also in the startup-y tech world. It's playing an important role. We got a little bit of insight into crowdfunding by the numbers. This is an infographic from last year, but the numbers are more or less the same. Crowdfunding is having an impact. People really are starting to, they're much more comfortable giving online, and really when it's a friend, a colleague, someone you trust and someone you care about who's making the ask, then the chances that you'll actually open up your wallet and make that donation and give that gift is significantly higher in crowdfunding as in any fundraising. The thing about crowdfunding, though, is that most projects fail. Overall, about 60% of crowdfunding projects fail. And the difference is a little bit different. If you think about the different platforms, Kickstarter and Indiegogo are two of the real heavy hitters in this space. And really only about a third or so of Kickstarter's projects end up getting fully funded. Indiegogo has an even higher failure rate, but part of that has to do with the model that Indiegogo has set up for the way that it distributes funds. They don't penalize the folks who set up projects in the same way that Kickstarter does. Kickstarter is an all or nothing platform. If you don't hit your goal, then you get no payout whatsoever. Indiegogo is not an all or nothing platform. If you only hit a certain percentage of your goal, then you'll still get a payout. It's just Indiegogo will take itself a slightly larger cut of your of your earnings. But overall, again, about 60% of crowdfunding projects fail. And I think the biggest mistake that a lot of people are making in this space is that there's an assumption that just setting up that page on Kickstarter, on Indiegogo, on GoFundMe, on whatever the platform happens to be, that's the work, right? You put it all together, you make it pretty, you put it out online, and that's where it ends. There's an assumption that the platform will do the work for you. And I think this is similar to the way a lot of us approached Facebook and Twitter and all of these kinds of things initially, that just having a presence there will somehow revolutionize our community and change the way that people relate to us. But again, crowdfunding is a process, and it's built on a set of tools, and it takes our investment. It takes a lot of work actually to make these kinds of campaigns operate just with any other kind of fundraising. It just requires a bit of a different perspective and a different set of technologies to make it happen. So what I'd like to suggest is that there are certain projects that are better suited to crowdfunding than others. Not everything that you need to raise money for is suitable for a crowdfunding project. And in my experience and in my research, I think there are really these three qualities that determine whether a project is ripe for crowdfunding. Whether or not it will succeed is another question and has a lot to do with, again, the work that you put into it. But whether the project itself is even a good fit for this kind of platform and this kind of world, I think is determined by these three T's that we have outlined here. First of all, you can ask yourself before you jump into this space, is this thing that I want to fund something tangible? That tends to be what works really well online. Lisa again mentioned Oculus Rift, which is a thing I can hold in my hands and use and bring into my daily life. It's a very practical outcome from this funding campaign. And any time that you're thinking about a project for crowdfunding, if there is a practical, tangible outcome, whether it be an event or a thing or a clear improvement on something that you can see, and we'll see a couple of examples of this, that tends to be what works really well online, that there's a tangible thing that comes out of it. The second C is time-bound or timely. Why does this have to happen now? Why is this an important thing to be investing in right at this moment? Networks and social media in general operate very much in the moment, so there's got to be a good reason for me to open up my wallet and fund a particular project right at this moment. And that may have to do with the calendar cycle, it may have to do with holidays, it may have to do with someone's birthday, as with Lisa's daughter, and all of these kinds of things. But there's got to be some clear, timely element as to why this project is happening right now. And the final category, our final T, is true. And I don't necessarily mean in terms of true versus false, but rather true in terms of emotional authenticity. Is this something that really speaks to the person, the person who is launching that project? Is this something that's really close to their heart, and something that emotion, that investment in this particular project can really come through on that crowdfunding platform? Or is it just sort of a thing that would be nice and we're going to kind of throw it out here and try this thing that may or may not be successful? But when you have a real story, a really emotionally compelling reason for putting this kind of project out into the world and asking for a large swath of people to invest in it, then the chances for success go way up. So having that emotional authenticity, having a timeliness about the project, and making it something that people can see or touch or hear or whatever it is at the end of it, all of these things really contribute to a much more successful opportunity for crowdfunding. And so given these categories, let's open up the Q&A one more time. It seems like that's the easier place to drop some of our thoughts. I would love to hear from all of you that if based on these categories, is there something in particular that jumps to mind for you that might be a project that's ripe for crowdfunding in your community? Is there something that you're working on, a tangible benefit to the community, something that has to happen right now, something that's really emotionally compelling? What's happening in your sphere that might be ripe for this kind of funding based on these categories? So if you'd like to try opening up the Q&A one more time and popping in some thoughts, I'd love to hear what you think might work in your space as a test for doing some crowdfunding. Great. Rachel popped in and said perhaps an elevator for the building. Absolutely a tangible outcome. Absolutely something that can be presented as time-bound, that this is something that the community really needs right now to serve different kinds of members. Building the emotional story around that elevator would certainly really help boost the effectiveness of that kind of campaign. Sounds good. What else?
Just as an example of that elevator, that happened at my grandmother's very small shul in central Massachusetts, that the founders of that congregation were getting to the age where going up and down the steep stairs to the social hall was either impossible or scary. And they did do a campaign. It wasn't an online crowdfunding, but reaching out to a very broad network of the community, including the children and grandchildren of those elderly founding members, which is a good example of how you might get quote unquote outsiders, people who aren't necessarily regular members of your congregation, to contribute, because my parents, for example, wanted my grandmother to be able to use that social hall and contributed to that elevator campaign. So that's a great example.
Awesome. Love it. So we had another example. We want to expand adult ed programs for the wider community. Interesting. I think it depends a lot on what the offering actually is and how tangible versus ethereal it is. I think having a very specific ask in that case is really important. And there's also got to be clear benefit to the community. They can't, giving the impression that the crowdfunding effort is just sort of subsidizing the greater adult education program is going to be less effective, I think, than saying we're trying something new and we're building this really exciting thing that you can be a part of. So being very, very specific and really knowing the audience that you're trying to capture with something like that, I think would work well. So we had a couple questions about, is this mainly for members, just using crowdfunding as a new technique to raise money, or do we expect outsiders to give? I think it really depends on the project and the goal. I would recommend, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but I would recommend, first of all, thinking about your existing community, and are these folks who are online? Are these folks who are going to even see and be responsive to this kind of campaign? And secondly, to think about what are the goals beyond just raising the money. Is this about raising visibility for a particular project or mission within your synagogue, or is it about tightening the sort of building a greater sense of community among current members? There are all these sort of extra goals and things that you can think about outside of that. I think there needs to be, if you're asking the folks who are not members to contribute to a crowdfunding project that is based in a synagogue, there needs to be a clear benefit to the wider community. It can't necessarily be for something that would just stay within the walls of your institution. But we'll look at a couple of examples and we can come back to this question. So great, if folks come up with other examples of things that might be ripe in your own ecosystem for crowdfunding, I would love to hear them. But in the meantime, we'll take a look at a couple of examples of things that have happened in the past few years. Here's one that was a very, very successful campaign. This is something that happened in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, where I happened to live for a couple of years, and this is something that happened just after my husband and I had moved in. There was a young man who was part of the community in Brooklyn there, who unfortunately died of a drug overdose. It was a really tragic story, and but he was this fun, bright, passionate light in the community, and it really hit people very hard that he was lost. And so in his honor, a bunch of his friends got together and decided we are going to write a Torah in honor of our friend's memory. And a Torah, as I'm sure many of you know, is no small investment. It's a very expensive piece, but it's really it's a beautiful tribute to this person. And also, it happens that this is a great example of something that is, first of all, tangible. The Torah that comes out of it is going to be used by that community. It's timely. This happened very recently in the wake of Kazi's death, and it was true. It has this really emotionally compelling story around it, and it also so happens that writing a Torah is something that, when you're thinking about the perks, the gifts that someone will get in exchange for contributing to this campaign, it can be broken down very nicely based on letters of the Torah, or of writing a whole pasuk, writing a whole line of the Torah, or a column, or a chapter, or whatever it is. It parses out very nicely, and I think the combination of all of these factors really contributed to this being ultimately a wildly successful campaign. They raised almost 1.5 times what they were hoping to get, and ultimately did write this Torah and have an event in Kazi's memory after putting this all together.
Miriam, I think this is a great example of, what I want to point out here is that they raised 144% of their goal. And you have to think about the mindset of the people who continue to give after the goal has been reached. And I think the really successful crowdfunding projects, we see that happen with some regularity, actually, because people want to be part of something larger. It's not just about enabling something that otherwise wouldn't happen, but there's a real sense of doing it together. And I think it's an insight into kind of the psychology of what makes these crowdfunding projects work and attract people.
Yes, absolutely. Being part of that story is huge, and having that real life connection to it. It turned out to be a great way to pay tribute to this person, and then also add value to the community, and all of these things absolutely contributed to that mindset. Here's another example that ended up in a very similar situation. This is actually a bat mitzvah project by a young woman in Chicago who teamed up with a friend of hers. They worked with a church on the south side of Chicago, and got together, and as their B'nai Mitzvah project, instead of having a party, they ended up raising money to build a playground on Chicago's south side, working with that organization Kaboom, which puts together awesome playgrounds in a very short period of time. And this is another example where it's very tangible. I mean, they came out at the end of this with a playground. It's certainly time-bound because it is both responding to, this is my bat mitzvah project, so this is something that I'm going to do as part of my rite of passage in becoming a Jewish woman. And it was very true. This is something that was very close to both of those kids' hearts. They're young enough to still love playgrounds themselves, and mature enough to understand that not everyone has access to the things that they do. And building that partnership and building that story, this is also an example where they did a great job getting the press out about this particular campaign and telling that story, not only of the bat mitzvah, but of the collaboration with this church and of revitalizing Chicago's South Side, which is become kind of a problematic area, and it turned into this beautiful movement, and again raised 150% of what they expected to put together, because it was so compelling and because people wanted to support these kids, both the B'nai Mitzvah and the children who would benefit from this playground. They wanted to be part of that story. And so this was a really lovely example of crowdfunding gone very, very right. We've got one more for you. Finally, another synagogue in New York, in Manhattan proper this time, the Stanton Street Shul. Stanton Street Synagogue was unfortunately damaged pretty badly by Hurricane Sandy, I believe. And this is a classic, iconic, beautiful synagogue, sort of nestled into the Lower East Side, and it's been there forever, and it was just hit so hard by this terrible storm. And so they used that opportunity, they saw this as an opportunity to reach out to their community in a new way. And so they used crowdfunding to raise, I believe it was $10,000, which was only a small portion of the I believe $100,000 that they needed total to repair the roof and some other damage that had happened after the storm. But again, very tangible. They needed this particular piece of repair. They needed it in order to not only keep the community going, but to repair this iconic building that's a part of New York history, a part of Jewish history. So very tangible, time-bound. This happened right in the wake of Sandy that had affected so many other New Yorkers, and it was really a time of huge coming together across all kinds of communities. And very true. The emotional connection to this space in particular. The Stanton Street Synagogue is a really, really beautiful building, has all kinds of murals and really interesting glass work, and it's a place just really rich with history. And so asking the community to come together to fund a slice of the work that would help bring this building back to its former glory in the wake of this storm was a really powerful story, again, that people wanted to be a part of. But again, we've seen a couple of examples of just wildly successful campaigns. But as I mentioned before, the majority of crowdfunding efforts do fail. And again, a lot of that has to do with just the lack of planning and the assumption that because you have these amazing technologies behind it, that it's somehow going to be easier or take less time. And neither of those things is really true. There's a lot of planning that goes into a really successful crowd campaign. It's a little bit different when you're doing something that has that sort of emergency feel around it. For instance, in the wake of Sandy, or in the wake of, a death of a community member, for instance. But to do any kind of serious crowd campaign, there are a lot of successful campaigns that take up to 6 months in advance to plan and to lay the groundwork for the success of that campaign. And I think it's because they, first of all, understand that it requires a lot of work, but that the benefits are not just in the funding from the crowd, but the benefits are in the crowd itself. And we can talk a little bit more about that at the end. But planning your campaign is absolutely key to the success of any crowdfunding effort. Knowing the story you're telling. So we just saw 3 examples of really powerful crowd campaigns that had very clear stories around them. And so, for instance, if you're doing that crowdfunding campaign for the elevator, for instance, you're not necessarily going to tell the story of the elevator per se, because elevators don't have such exciting lives, but you may tell the story of the one person who is such an integral member of the community and has given so much of him or herself and is now in a situation where they can't attend services anymore because they can't make it those 2 or 3 flights up the stairs. And so building in that story, building in that emotional draw, connecting the story back to the community. These are really important elements to think through, that it's more than just the thing that you're asking for. Knowing who is in your network of supporters is huge. How and where will you engage them? And the key here is that most of the successful crowdfunding efforts that I've been a part of or that I've seen happen do not exist completely online. They have very powerful emails and Facebook messages and tweets and blog posts and press releases and all of those kinds of things that support that story and share that message. But they're also being talked about at events. They're also being shared over, conversations that happen in the lobby or when you run into that person at the grocery store. They exist outside of that digital sphere and take on a life of their own. So understanding who that network of supporters is and how and where you will engage them is a very important piece to building a successful campaign. Knowing who's in charge of everything, just having your roles assigned at the beginning. Who's going to be monitoring all of the messages? Who's going to be sending out emails to your supporters? Who's going to be tracking your thermometer of how much you've raised and communicating that out to the community? Who's going to be reaching out to press or to any kind of other local organizations that might want to partner in this kind of effort? Having a point person for all the different aspects of your campaign is also going to help keep things moving forward and make sure that nothing gets dropped along the way. And of course, this element of the rewards or perks that you'll offer along the way, and being thoughtful about what you can actually deliver afterwards. The last thing you want to do is overpromise and underdeliver. Better to go the other way around, and better to think about perks that will help build a personal connection between you and the people who have funded this campaign. Crowdfunding, again, is a huge opportunity for community building as much as it is for fundraising. And Slava Rubin, a fellow member of the tribe and the CEO of Indiegogo, reminds us that if you don't know who is funding you on day one, don't launch. You're not ready. Keep thinking about it, keep planning, and then get up and rolling. So we'll go into a little bit more depth about all of these, but Lisa, are there any questions coming up that we should address?
Let's see. I don't see any questions yet, but please feel free to post them in the chat or in the Q&A if you have anything that you want to ask.
Okay, fantastic. So moving right along. So building off of this quote from Slava Rubin of, if you don't know who's supporting you on day one, don't launch. This idea of building the network before you need it is so huge, and the first real element of success for any crowdfunding campaign. If you are not currently active on social media, if you do not have an engaged community that's opening your emails and responding to your tweets or whatever it is, if you don't have that level of, a certain level of community even before you decide to pitch this project, that's the first piece of work. And that's something that I would encourage you to go back to the previous webinars for and think about what does it mean to build community online? What does it mean to be really engaging and to develop that presence that is not only about broadcasting your message in that hub and spoke kind of way that Lisa introduced at the beginning, but is really about being conversational and building relationships with people in a real way. Once you've developed those connections, then you can start activating that network and thinking about what would it take to bring these people from, mere observers or conversationalists to supporters through a campaign where they can donate as little as $5 or $10 or $18 and get something special and meaningful in return. But really the point of all of this is just to say that the first thing that someone hears from you online should not be an ask for money. There needs to be an existing relationship. There needs to be something there to build off of and to activate before you make those kinds of asks. All right, and I'm going to take a couple of minutes and just talk about platforms, because this image here is just a snapshot of a few of the crowdfunding platforms that are out there. I can't claim to know all of them in any depth. There's really too many to count, and some of them are specific to certain communities. There are particular crowdfunding platforms that are just for raising money for animals, for instance, or just for raising money to cover health concerns and medical bills and those kinds of things. It can be really, really overwhelming. There are a lot out there. There are a lot of choices. And so what we'll talk about is sort of how to narrow that field a little bit. And I'll go a little bit more in depth with a couple that you may want to consider for your own crowdfunding efforts. So there are 5 big questions that I think are worth asking yourself, and this is I will send this again. We'll send this presentation and a couple of links to additional resources after the webinar. But GrantSpace offers some really thoughtful outlines for what are the questions that you should be thinking about before you choose the platform for your crowdfunding campaign. And the first is the question of, do you keep what you raise? Kickstarter, Indiegogo, all of these places, the way that their business model is that they take a cut of whatever gets raised on their platform. And so knowing what that percentage is, knowing if there are any other fees associated with it, that's something that you're going to want to look into, because it'll affect your bottom line coming out of it. How easy is it to use? Do you feel comfortable clicking around on this platform? Is there customer support? Are you going to have a point person at that crowdfunding platform who really knows that platform inside and out, who's going to be able to help you out when you have some, wonky issue with the messages to your supporters, or if the video just insists on not loading, or whatever it may be? Will you have that support system behind the scenes? There are certain crowdfunding platforms that have some unique tools. For instance, there are a few that have event integrations that allow you to not only host your crowdfunding, but also to invite all of those supporters to some kind of bash or whatever it is, to either continue raising money or to celebrate your successes. So thinking about, is there added value to those kinds of unique tools, or is that too many bells and whistles? What do you really need in order to make this happen? Customization is an important question. To what extent do you need your space to be branded? To what extent does it need to look like your organization, or does it need to reflect the personality of the person who is who's putting it on? Making it look pretty is important. We expect good design online at this point. And so that customization question isn't one to pass off too quickly. And finally, the restrictions question is also an important one. There are certain platforms that either will not raise money specifically for a 501c3, for a registered nonprofit, that they will only raise money for personal causes, or they will explicitly not raise money for personal things like health bills or whatever it is. And in addition to this restriction, kind of a related piece is there are certain crowdfunding platforms that have built up a particular kind of community around them. So for instance, Kickstarter is very much a maker community. The folks that launch projects on Kickstarter tend to be putting together a thing that they would like to launch, and investing in that thing is ostensibly placing your pre-order more than anything. Whereas there are other platforms that are specific to different kinds of causes or asks. And so just knowing what those are and knowing what your options are is always a good thing. But with that, I'd like to talk about two platforms in particular that tend to speak really well to Jewish community and the needs that we might have. The first one is Juicer. You may have heard of this. It's been around for several years. This is a platform that really hosts only Jewish projects. They do offer a dedicated campaign point person. So there is somebody behind the scenes at Juicer who helps you walk through every step of your campaign and really invests in your success. And they have, because of that, they have about a 70% campaign success rate, which, based on our numbers from earlier in this presentation, is very, very high for most crowdfunding platforms. So Juicer tends to be a good choice if you are doing something that is very explicitly Jewish, and if part of the impetus behind hosting this campaign is to grow your network and to get access to this whole community of people who have either launched or funded other Juicer projects, because that's part of the benefit of hosting your campaign on this platform. That said, the other part of the reason that their success rate is so high is that they vet every single project that they put up on their site. Whereas with a platform like Kickstarter or Indiegogo, where anybody can launch anything and it can fail the next day and it will sit there for years and years and nobody will ever notice, Juicer will review every single project pitch that comes in to ensure that, first of all, it's appropriate for their platform, and secondly, to work with the whoever submitted it to ensure that that their campaign has the best chance for success. So even if you'd like to put your project on Juicer, I can't necessarily guarantee that it would be hosted there, because the powers that be at Juicer may decide that it's inappropriate for what they're trying to do. But definitely something worth looking into and getting involved in, and they host all kinds of interesting projects. Another one that I'm going to highlight is a platform called Charity. So Charity with a D, as you see up in the upper left-hand corner. Charity is an interesting platform. They've also been around. They're younger than Juicer, haven't been around for quite so long. They run only 24-hour campaigns. But first of all, don't let that fool you. You and I already know that for most of these campaigns, there's been months and months of groundwork getting the campaign ready to go. But once the campaign launches on Charity, it only lives on the site for 24 hours. So these folks that are raising in the hundred thousands and the millions of dollars are doing it within the space of 24 hours. And the reason they can do that at such absurdly high numbers is because Charity has a very unique back end. Essentially what they do is whoever wants to launch a campaign on Charity, Charity will work with them not only to help build that network of potential supporters, but also to identify 3 of what they call matchers for every campaign. So for every single campaign, every single dollar that gets donated is quadrupled. There are 3 higher level donors behind the scenes who are matching every single donation. And those people come from your network. They work with you to figure out who those people are. It's not sort of a faceless crew of rich Jews behind the scenes who want to donate to anything. Part of what makes Charity work is that it's an opportunity to both engage a wider community on a slightly lower level. So those $5, those $18, those $25 donations, but also to engage the folks who are more capable of doing $5,000 and $10,000 donations, who will then come together as a small group to match every single donation dollar for dollar. So, so for instance, you see over here the Jewish Heritage Center, of that $430,000, really it was only a little over $100,000 that was raised online through the crowdfunding, and the other $300,000 came from the 3 matching backers who were affiliated with that campaign. So you may argue that that sort of artificially inflates the success of the campaign, but at the same time, dollars is dollars, right? At the end, they are raising that much money and doing it with the help of this particular platform. Charity claims to have a 100% success rate. And I think that part of this is due to the fact that they do also choose their campaigns very carefully and have really impressive marketers behind the scenes who are helping get the word out about these different projects. And it's worth looking into. It's an interesting take on things, and those 24 hours that your campaign is running are super, super hectic and challenging. But if you've done your groundwork beforehand and you've got your matchers set up, then charity is a good option for these kind of higher level campaigns. Okay, any questions before I go on to this next piece? Or Lisa, anything to jump in with?
I don't see any questions showing up in the chat, but as always, please feel free. There are no dumb questions, especially when it's a new topic like this, something that you haven't done before. One comment I'll just make about the choice of platforms, and I think this goes for any kind of online transaction. Not only do different platforms offer different kinds of features, like Kickstarter is all or nothing, and some others will let you keep whatever you get, even if you don't meet your goal. But there's also kind of brand awareness and reputation. So on the one hand, the 2 platforms, Miriam, that you just spoke about, given their focus in the Jewish community, might give some people comfort or a sense of being part of something larger. On the other hand, if they've never heard of those brands, people might be a little bit more reluctant to, put in their email address and their credit card info. So thinking about your community and how comfortable they are with these things, other platforms like CrowdRise or Razoo or Kickstarter might be names that they've come across before, and will give them a little bit more comfort in doing that kind of processing through. So your community best, but that's just one other variable to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And the other piece of that to keep in mind is that 90% of the people who are going to fund your campaign come from inside your network. They're either the people you know directly or 1 degree out from them. If you're lucky and you're running a successful campaign, then maybe 10% will come from that greater ecosystem that's been fostered by charity or by Juicer or by Kickstarter or whatever it may be. But I would not work under the assumption, again, that the platform is going to do the work for you, or the network that's associated with the platform is going to do the work for you. It still needs to be about your people and the perhaps 1 degree out target audience that you're trying to activate with these kinds of campaigns. You can't rely on the platform to do that work for you. But absolutely, the comfort and the brand recognition is not something to be taken lightly. That is definitely true. Okay, so a couple more tips. Another big question that comes up when it comes to crowdfunding is just how much do I raise? And in general, I would say that it seems kind of obvious that the lower the goal you set, the more likely you are to actually hit it. At the same time, there is something to be said for setting something that's a little bit aspirational, that really helps your community rally behind a particular cause. I think what I'm trying to get across here is that setting out a campaign budget that includes kind of all of the expenses of actually running the campaign is going to make you feel a lot better about that check that ultimately comes in at the end, because you'll know that not only was the project covered, but everything that went into running that campaign is also being taken care of under that ultimate goal number. And so considering some of those things is important, but the other thing that's worth considering when it comes to crowdfunding is stretch goals are really fun and engaging. If you set let's say you set a goal of raising $2,500 towards a particular, not huge project, but what you actually need in order to fund the thing is more like $5,000, then you can start with a $2,500 goal and lay the groundwork for that, get the community going, and then once you're at $2,300 and you know that in the next 3 hours you're going to hit that goal, you can talk about having a stretch goal. You can say, well, you know what, we originally set out to raise $2,500, but why don't we raise the full $5,000? And then you can go back to your initial backers and say, wow, you guys, we did this. Like, this is so crazy and amazing. We're going to go for the whole Megillah, right? We're going to try and raise the full $5,000 that this project is going to take. Will you support us again? Will you share this with your friends? These are the rewards and perks that we're going to give to people who double down on their investment in this project. And it can be really exciting and energizing to start small and have a stretch goal for your community. And finally, I just want to drive it home that the goals when it comes to crowdfunding are much more than the money that's raised. This really is about community building, because you're activating these people who may not give under other circumstances, who may not even notice what you're up to under other circumstances. And to have those opportunities to give it lower levels and give it that personal touch and do it through a medium that's very, very comfortable. If you've laid the groundwork for that initially, by building the network before you need it, by engaging online and being conversational and building relationships and all of these good things that we've talked about in every other previous webinar, and then you put together your crowdfunding campaign, you really work to get these folks engaged, and then you actually follow up with them. That's a huge community building exercise. And just don't, in crowdfunding especially, because it is all about the people, because it is all about the crowd, don't discount them. Don't, the focus on the dollars and the seeing that thermometer with the money go up and up and up is really exciting and energizing. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's about the people who really feel like they're investing a piece of themselves in your project and in your cause. So keep it coming back to those faces, those voices, and don't forget about them after the crowdfunding ends. A couple quick common mistakes that folks make in crowdfunding campaigns. I won't do you the injustice of reading the entire slide to you, but I do want to hone in on number 5, not maintaining contact with supporters. This can happen at any point, right? As you're building up the network before the crowdfunding campaign, during the campaign itself, which may be 24 hours, which may be 30 days, which may be 60 days. Most campaigns don't last a whole lot longer than that. Doesn't seem to have any added value. But keeping in touch with the people who are your current and prospective supporters throughout is absolutely key. Sending them messages about the progress, saying thank you over and over again, encouraging them to share, and again, doing this not only through the digital platforms that are set up to share all the links and the methods of payments and all that kind of good stuff, but acknowledging people in real life. You know, when most of these, if you're engaging your members, for instance, if you're engaging your community that you're going to see at Kiddush anyway, that's a great time to talk to them and say thank you and use it as an opportunity to build some buzz around that conversation. Keep in contact with the supporters. and it will do nothing but pay off. You can't go wrong with maintaining consistent contact. And just to close, a couple other tips to help set yourself up for success. Before you jump into any crowdfunding campaign, make sure that you've done it as a participant beforehand, that you really understand what the experience is of the person on the other side. Having that empathetic view will really help translate into a better campaign on your end. And do it with a few, right? I mean, let's make sure that you get in on a campaign that is asking for really big bucks, or a campaign that looks like it might not make it, or to get a sense of a few different things. Set aside $50 and give it a try, and help out your friends while you're at it. Starting early and starting with your why is huge. Knowing why you want to do this and why your project is ripe for crowdfunding. Remember, we talked about those 3 T's of the project needing to be tangible, timely, time-bound, and true, having that emotional authenticity. Make sure you have a really compelling why, because especially online, that's the thing that's going to help you cut through all of the clutter of everything else that's happening around you on Facebook or Twitter or whatever it may be. We're inundated with messages, and those that tell the best stories win the race. Focus on what's in it for the supporters and say thank you. We have so many ways to say thank you, and it just makes people feel awesome. And just like Maya Angelou, I believe, said at one point, people will forget what you say and they'll forget what you did, but they will always remember how you made them feel. And saying thank you is a really easy way to make other people feel awesome and remember you ultimately. And that's a big part of being part of a community. And finally, a very, very practical tip, break that surface tension. When it comes to crowdfunding, people do not want to invest in the unsuccessful campaign. Everybody wants to be part of the winning story. And so in those 6 or 4 or 3 months or whatever it is that you use to plan your campaign beforehand, make sure that you've identified enough family and friends and colleagues and whoever it is who are ready to invest in your project on day one, so that the moment your campaign goes live, your thermometer of how much you've raised shoots up to 30%. And it's been proven over and over that the campaigns that start off with guaranteed about a third of the funds that they're trying to raise, those are the campaigns that have an infinitely greater chance of success, because everybody wants to be in on the winning team, and they want to be part of that really compelling story. And seeing that there's already these 15 or 20 people who have given enough money to get the project a third of the way to its goal, that's a great story to be able to tell to the rest of your supporters. And so lay that groundwork beforehand. Don't rely on the technology to do it for you. It's all about building those relationships. It's all about maintaining contact, about doing the legwork beforehand so that when the actual campaign comes around, you are ready to go, and you become one of those great success stories that we talked about at the very beginning. And have fun while you're doing it. This is something new and exciting. Try it small first and grow out from there. And keep track of what you learn along the way. Stay in touch with the people that you're connecting with. And crowdfunding can be a really competitive, hard space, but it can also be really delightful. And it can be a very fun way to engage supporters that you may not even have known that you had. So with that, any final questions before we wrap up? Or thoughts from you, Lisa?
Yeah, feel free to post any questions in our last couple minutes if you have them. We welcome them. Last thoughts. I mean, this is one of those things that I just feel like needs to be a tool in your toolbox. I appreciate, Miriam, how you talked about being really thoughtful and intentional about when to use a crowdfunding approach as opposed to other kinds of fundraising approaches. And I think that's really true. Um, the people I see who just jump to it and say, hey, if I ask everybody for money, they're going to give because this crowdfunding thing is magic. It doesn't necessarily happen. So I think the tips and the kind of honest rigor that you've presented today is really important. At the same time, I want to say, don't let that scare you away from crowdfunding, because if you listen to the advice that Miriam's given, you will be able to identify the times and the places when it's really important and a really ripe opportunity to use crowdfunding. The other thing I just wanted to mention is there are some projects that you might fund that are very particular to your community, like a new playground for the early childhood program, or supporting a family that had some unexpected need, and the community wants to rally and support those folks. Those might be somewhat particular to your community, but there also may be some opportunities to do things that have some wider appeal, and that can tap into a wider community. And those are great opportunities to explore as well, making some community event happen that might be open to people who are beyond your congregation, for example. So keep that in mind, and remember that you have this tool in your toolbox. As Miriam said a minute ago, I highly suggest that you find some small way to experiment with this, whether it's in a congregational setting or a personal setting or project, so that you can experience it and kind of feel how it goes and what makes an important difference. And as you do those experiments, please share them with us. We're really excited to, help share and promote your campaign, but also to really learn from what you've been doing and help others learn from your successes and also your challenges too. So as we draw our hour to a close, first, Miriam, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. And Miriam's offered her email address and her Twitter handle as well if you have any further questions for her on this particular topic. And thank you so much to UJ Federation of New York for making this 5-part webinar series available to congregations both in New York and around the country. And thank you to everyone who's participated for dedicating your time and your attention and for your examples, sharing your own work, and your fantastic questions. We hope this series has been valuable to you and that you put what you've learned into action. Please do feedback to us any further questions you have, things you'd like to continue learning about, and sharing the work that you are doing. In our follow-up email, we'll have the recording, slides, some examples and links to resources. And we also have a survey to get your input on how this series went and what else you would like to be learning about. Please take a moment to fill it out. Thanks so much for being with us. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.